for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Rachel. I'm the director here at the Sudbury Historical Society, and we're so excited to have Ken Gloss here to present. So we'll have the waiting room that has been disabled. People can just come on in. If everyone could keep themselves muted for the presentation, we'll do a question and answering session at the end. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and I'll moderate, I'll relay them to Ken. And we're just really thrilled to have this. So thank you all for being here, taking time out of your day. And I'm gonna hand it over to Ken.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be doing this. Although for the last year, I've said on the talks, I'd much rather be there doing it. I mean, the personal contact, also the sort of offhand questions, the appraisals are much, much easier to do live and personally than online. What I will say is there are a couple of appraisals sent in earlier, and maybe someone on that will want to show things. I'll do as much as I can within the time allowed. But any question, anything I don't get to, I will be available either by email, calling, coming into the store, and happy to do it. But it's a lot of fun. And what I'm going to do in a talk, the talk will last about 40 or so, 45 minutes. I'll basically tell a lot of stories about the book people, the places we've been, some people who've worked at the store, a little bit of my background. And then in the next 15 minutes or 20 minutes, I'll do some of the questions and I'll do some of the appraisals. And it's a lot, usually it's a lot of fun and I enjoy it. In any case, let me give a little bit of my background. The history of the Brattle Book Shop goes back to the 1800s. But for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. And with that, they bought half interest in the store. And it's always been in Boston. People call us from Harvard Square on Brattle Street saying, "Where are you?" We tell them we're in downtown. When my parents bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is. And my father built the store with his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge, and he was a bit of a character and a showman. We've had 7 different locations over the years. Every time we'd move, when it was planned, he'd move the best books over to the new location, and then he'd run sales, half price, $1.50, quarter dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever. He'd ring a big bell. People would go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave. The next group would come in. And he gave away over 250,000 books like that. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969. And we were moving from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall to West Street, where we are now. And there were books left over at the end of the giveaway. And like I say, he was a bit of a character and a showman. And if you can picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Book Shop." They filled it up with books and they drove it from the end of Washington Street up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and then back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back the whole time, throwing books out the back of the covered wagon. And now the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend, told him he could do it all morning. But within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And we've been on West Street since 1969. When we first moved in, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. We didn't have any insurance to speak of, but we wanted to keep going, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors up the street on West Street, rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books, Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And even though it was a meager stock, within a month we reopened. The main thing was just keep going. Now, over the next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is again a few doors down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, a third floor with rare books, rare books, first editions, letters, manuscripts, autographs, and so on. And that type of business, the large old general secondhand bookstore, and especially in the inner cities, is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, read books, sell books. But particularly in the last 20 or 25 years, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, have one right after the other been going out of business. The last few years, the internet has speeded that along, and last year has been a really difficult year, but we own the property. I hope to do this for a long time. I have daughters who are in their 30s. I don't think they plan on coming into it, but I've done this essentially all my life. My parents say my first word was book. I'm not sure, maybe it was, but I'm sure they were talking about books all the time. And I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summers during college. I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now has been over 40 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And a lot of the fun is the people and the places. And you see, even the people who work for us can be interesting. A number of years ago, I hired an employee. He had been working at the store for about a week. And I was helping a customer, an older man. At the time, I felt he was older anyways, came in and he was asking for an author named Doniford Yates, an obscure novelist. I knew who Doniford Yates was. We went over to the section, looked, we didn't have anything. I asked him if he wanted to leave his name. He said, no, I'll check again. He left. My new employee, who I barely knew, came up to me. He says, does that man come in here often? And I said, I really wasn't paying attention, but no, I didn't recognize. I wasn't really, I was looking for the books. He said, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. So you never know what you're going to see. And this same employee gave me one of the most memorable introductions that I've had. And again, this is 40 years maybe later. He had worked for us at that point for a month. And we had 4 tickets to the Celtics game. And I said, Hugh, would you like to go to the Celtics game with us? He said, yes, but give me the 2 tickets. I'll meet you there. I'll bring somebody. My wife and I get to the Celtics game. He's sitting there with a woman, and he introduces her and he goes, this is my wife, Mickey. We're going to get divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? But I definitely remembered it. And one of the most interesting parts about the business for me is going out to houses and estates. It's the things you see and the people who come in and the characters and never knowing what you're going to get. And I'll relate a few of those stories and also a few about some of our regular customers and some of the things we've had, and then see maybe some back and forth with questions. I was out of the store a while ago, actually a good while ago, and a lady called. Her name was Mrs. Fisher, and she had some books. I called her back and she said, oh yes, my father died in Providence. We have 500 art reference books. We want to get the best price we can. We're inviting a number of dealers down to bid on them. Would you be interested? Well, 500 art reference books sounded quite interesting. Sorry about that. In any case, I went to Providence to look at these books of Mrs. Fisher's father. They lived in an old street up near Brown University. got to the house. It was a large, old general antiquarian, uh, uh, large old Victorian Federalist house. Got led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, there was 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted. She was pleased, I was happy, and she said, "My mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction. But would you be interested in going into Newport and take a look at the books there?" Well, their house in Newport was one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of the mansions and at one point wandering from the basement to the attic all on my own without a tour guide saying, "Come here, go here," but just one, it was fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, this was another mansion, not quite as big as the Browns, but it was the Perry family. And now, when I do talks like this or do them at the store all day long, we do free appraisals. Matter of fact, my goal is that whenever you think of an old book, you think of me in the Brattle Book Shop. Um, and one of the ways I feel I can do that is by giving out as much free information as reasonable. But there are times when people need very formal written appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, whatever, and then I discuss a fee. In any case, another mansion in Newport, and this was the Perry family, Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. What they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But these were the day-to-day accountings of the ships. They would sometimes realize tens of thousands of dollars profit from capturing one ship. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, "Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg." And that was the last you heard of the captain. So that's a little bit different now. When my father was still alive, and he died over 35 years ago, we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but she sounded like she had a few interesting books. She lived in Sharon, so it wasn't very far away. We got to her house, and it was a little ranch house. Paint was peeling, weeds were growing, and you sort of say, "Gee, what's going to be here?" She opened the door. She was elderly, quite elderly, but we walked inside and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. Well, she got to talking. It turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution. And she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues and all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle, but there was a lot more to it. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out the books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into the house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors, pastoral European scenes. But when I first saw them, I thought they were nice. And the more I looked at them and the more she talked and the longer I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, "Those 10 watercolors, they're really nice." And she sort of turned around and matter-of-factly said, "Oh yes, they're all Turners." So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of paintings. And it was a matter of fact, oh yes. So you never know what you're going to see, the people, the characters. And matter of fact, speaking of characters, about 20 years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, He's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Now, he was a young man at the time. He said he was looking forward to this dinner, all the learning and insight he was going to get. He said he was excited. He got to the table a little bit early. He said 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. And Edison was elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing, and sat down opposite. He said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, "My, Tom, you look very good." And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now I can go on, but I'll tell one more story in this vein, and then a few more from there. Uh, we get hundreds of phone calls at the store, people wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. And most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of our heads. Some are a little more involved, and some you really have to do some research, but that can be fun. But every once in a while, you get a call that really stands out. And again, this was a while ago. I answered the phone, "Hello, Brattle Book Shop, can I help you?" Lady, elderly, thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." Now you have to admit that gets your attention. She stops and lets it sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. When he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of letters from the president, handwritten letters. Now, she wanted to get an offer on them. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was great. The letters were fabulous. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer for them, but much as I suspected, there was no way she could sell these letters. The letters were part of her life. Anyways, I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong. Maybe someday I'll hear about them again. One of the things that's a lot of fun, and you go out to houses and estates and never knowing what you're going to see, but sometimes you get some really interesting things in, or you get to handle or touch things. And many times people have asked me about, well, what are some of the things that really stand out, or some of the best, or some of the oldest things you've seen? And I'll tell a few on that. And then there's one item that I particularly think stands out as one of the most valuable items that I have had or have. I got a call from a museum in Boston, and this was for an insurance appraisal. They were loaning this item from their museum to another museum for an exhibit. And they needed an appraisal just for the insurance that they had to put on it. And they told me what it was. And I said, look, I'll do the appraisal for you. I'll do it for free. I was a member of the museum, but I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want to see the original. And they said, sure, that would be fine. Come over and we'll do it. What it was a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. So I'm sitting there holding this 4 pages of letters with Paul Revere's handwriting explaining exactly what happened on Paul Revere's ride. I mean, when you hold something like that, you think back, Paul Revere held this. He put his ideas and thoughts down on this. I mean, I get letters of Washington, Lincoln, Edison, Einstein, but every time you touch one of those, these people have held that piece of paper. They've put their thoughts and ideas down on it. And it's still, even though I deal with this, can send a chill up your spine every time. And that's why people collect things like that. It's a direct connection. I one time went to a house in Belmont, and there was an attic, and in the attic was a trunk. They had gone through most everything else. At the bottom of the trunk was an envelope, or more like a big manila envelope, not a little one. And you open it up, and inside it were 10 letters of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Monroe, Madison. I mean, it was just fabulous. But there was one letter I particularly liked. I brought it home. I showed it to my daughters. And normally when they were young, they're in their 30s now, but when they were young, I'd bring home things like Audubons and all sorts of items. And they'd go, yeah, Dad's bringing home another old book. They were sort of nonplussed. But I brought this home, and it was right after 9/11. And it was a letter of Thomas Jefferson's. And in the letter, he was talking about what to do about traitors and terrorists. He actually was using those words. And he said, this was just during the War of 1812. And there were a lot of Americans who would have preferred the United States lose the revolution, and they would have liked them to lose the war to England in 1812. And that's who Jefferson was relating to as traitors and terrorists. But he said what should happen is they should get the full protection of the law and absolutely nothing else. I knew I had something when I showed it to my daughters, and they were all excited about it. And they said, can we bring it to school for show and tell? And I said, well, maybe not that, but something that interested them with it was fascinating. Now, a lot of times when you go into people's houses, one of the hardest things about selling books is that things they've collected that over the years, and there's tremendous emotional attachment. Now, the main reason people sell usually is they're moving from the big house to the smaller, or it's an estate, someone's died. And even for the person selling the books, if it's not their books, I mean, the person's personality many times is in the library. But also, too, we get a normal call and someone has a collection, and it's the two answers we usually get to start are interesting, but usually you have to break it down. One of the first questions we ask is, how many books do you have? And the most common answer is a lot. And then you ask, well, any particular type of book? And they go, well, we have fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. So we try to narrow it down, any particular subject, area, field. But one of the great things that technology has brought is many times the easiest thing to do is not write out lists, not long calls, but we tell people to just take pictures of the shelves. Like behind me, you'll see a lot of leather bindings. Well, people can take photographs of the whole shelves or two shelves at a time. If they're in focus and we can see them, we can get a really good idea, and it's the quickest, easiest way to know what someone has. Although many times, and we drive all over the New England, all over the Northeast. Friday, I'm driving up to Burlington, Vermont. I hope there's not a snowstorm. I'm hoping for rain, but we go all over everywhere. And again, it's that search and the hunt that is fun. And you never know what you're going to see. And now it's an easy process for me, because once someone's gone through it and gotten through the emotional part, like, oh, this book was given by this person, or I remember that, then it's money. And money is easy. It's either works or it doesn't work. But going over, gee, did Uncle Harry buy this, or was Aunt so-and-so, or did my grandmother give me this? That can be very hard and difficult, but it doesn't have to do with the money. And I found that out when I was doing my father's books. A library that normally would have taken me a few days took me a few months. And I remember one of the collections that caught my eye. And my father I don't collect books per se, although I'm going to talk about a collection or two that we do have, because when I was growing up, my father would bring home 3, 4, 5 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years, 5 or 6, 7 days a week. And you can imagine what our house looked like. But anyways, I was going through his books, but I found one box, and it was an interesting one. It was these old 8x10 movie stills of movies, and there were probably 400 or 500 of them in the movies. And my father liked movies, but I'm going, I don't understand why he has these until I started looking at them. And when I looked at them closely, every one of these 400 to 500 movie stills, somewhere in the picture was a book. Maybe it was the movie star holding a book. Maybe it was a background with bookshelves. Maybe there was a table on the book. Maybe there was a picture in the background with a picture of a book, or on and on and on like that. And I went through it, and it was an amazing collection. I ended up giving it to somebody who really appreciated it. I almost regret that now. I would have liked to have kept it, but it was, so you never know what people are going to collect. Now, me personally, again, like I say, I read a lot of books. I read books about books, book collecting. I read books on local history. I read Stephen King and John Grisham, and I have whole stories about John Grisham that we might or might not get to, and so on. But I generally haven't collected, partly as a reaction to my father. So I read books, I take them home, I bring them back. But there is one collection that I sort of started. It started out as a bit of a joke. One day I got a book in, and it had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title of the book was Flushed with Pride, the story of Thomas Crapper, who invented the toilet. I thought it was fun. I brought it home. I showed it to my wife. She said, we've got to put that in the bathroom. So we did. A couple of days later, I got another book, had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But with the big eyes staring at you, I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now, this is a little half bathroom. There's no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves. And now there are 400 of these Victorian style books with very decorative covers in the bathroom. People are a little taken aback. There's loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book falls off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. Now, recently also, or a few years ago, my wife had a collection of about 1,000 books on jazz. When we first started dating many, many years ago, I found out she liked jazz. And so I would get her books as presents. And this went on and on. Every birthday, Mother's Day, Christmas, I either got her a book on jazz or a signed studio photo of jazz musicians. And it went on and on. And then finally, my wife started saying, we were thinking of moving and downsizing. And she was saying, this collection, I really like it, but people are going to start forgetting about most of these people, who they were. Younger people don't have the same attachment. And we had a friend and actually a colleague who had a person who absolutely loved the collection. I mean, were spectacular. We said, fine, we'll sell it to them. They'll love it. They'll appreciate it. And out went that collection. And the other collection my wife still has is relatively small, but she has about 8 or 10 books of Anne Frank's diary. First edition, which is incredibly rare, which was written in Dutch, and some other nice illustrated editions. And one of the things people don't realize, you can have a collection of one book. When I first started with my father, we had a customer who collected Walden. He collected every edition he could find, the first edition, every language he could find, every edition if it had a different colored binding. In other words, sometimes an edition would come out with a blue binding, a green binding, a brown binding. He had every one, every place, every city, every type. He had 3,000 copies of Walden. And that was his collection. It was his passion, is what he loved to do. So you can collect one book. I was talking about a little earlier some of the things that I really remember holding and handling. There was the Paul Revere. Another time I went to a library again for a appraisal, and they had a copy of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica in the 1600s, a first edition, the foundation of modern mathematics. A first edition of that book in and of itself is probably worth upwards of $1 million. But this was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes and annotations in the bind. I mean, it was priceless. Uh, that book went from what was Babson College at the time to MIT, and now it's out at the Huntington Library in Pasadena, California. And recently, before the pandemic, I was in Pasadena and I made a point of going to the Huntington Library, looked at the glass case where that copy was, and I said, gee, I've touched that copy, I've held it. It was a lot of fun. Another time, we had a copy of American Indian Tribes by Curtis, the photographs. There were 700 large photographs of the American Indian tribes at the turn of the last century. At the time I had it, it was worth about $100,000. Now it's worth well into the millions of dollars, but I got to touch and look at every single one of those photographs. It was just wonderful. And sometimes what people want are really unusual, a memorable book of a different type. And I consider it valuable because one of the things that I collect now are stories. I don't collect books, but I have about, well, I'll hold it up a little, but it's page after page of lines or a sentence that have one word or one phrase, and it reminds me of a story. So I collect the stories. But we got a collection of cookbooks in at the stores, a couple of thousand cookbooks. And there were some really good ones. I mean, they went back to the 1800s, some really great books. But there was a box of these old pamphlets, sort of like how to make Jell-O, the Baker Chocolate Company, the recipes for chocolate. And some of them were very beautifully done and decorated. And a few can actually have some value, but they take a lot of time. And we had the 2,000 really good books that we were going to do very well with. And I said, look, to one of my assistants, I said, just put them out on the dollar table. There are going to be bargains there. People will be happy. They'll get them, but we'll save a lot of time. About an hour or two after we put them out, one customer comes running in with a pamphlet, and he's absolutely thrilled and excited, and he was beside himself about it. And, he said, I've been looking for this for years and years and years. I look at it, and the title was Coconuts and Constipation. You never know. You never know what someone's going to want. What I'll do just before we get to questions, one of the things I do, which I hope people out there watch, is for around 20 years now, I've done Antiques Roadshow. This last year for this show, they've done a few at celebrity houses, which will come up next month. But it's a wonderful thing. And the way that show is run is you go all over the country. And I'll tell you, one of the great things out of that show is that my wife and I were fortunate we can usually go a few days early, but why would we ever go to Fargo, Boise, Omaha, and anywhere you go in this country, if you take any time and effort, it's beautiful. The country is gorgeous and the people are wonderful. Don't talk about politics and religion, but it's wonderful. So that's been one great thing. Also meeting all the other appraisers and going out to dinner and becoming friendly. But the way that show works is, first of all, they don't pay the appraisers anything. They don't pay our airfare, hotel, meals. It's public television. So we go out on our own and at our own expense, but we get good PR. You're in a city at a venue, 3, 4, 5,000 people come to each venue. You appraise from about 7:30 in the morning, sometimes to 6, 7 at night, nonstop. Each person brings 2 items, so they do 6 to 10,000 items. They pick about 60 to 80 items or more to to tape for 3 hours of television. Some are very short, some are the longer appraisals. But as an appraiser, you never know if you're going to get on TV. In other words, if someone doesn't during the day bring you something, you could spend the money, you could spend the time, you could make the effort, and then not get anything that you taped. So from an appraiser's point of view, the greatest thing that can happen is the show usually opens around 7:30 in the morning. Someone comes in at 7:30, 8 o'clock. It's a good item. You call a producer over, they go, this is great, go on TV, 9 o'clock in the morning, you're done. And the rest of the day is easy. Whereas if nothing's come in at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you start to really worry. There was one item that I'll talk about that didn't get on, and then we'll see about the questions. Like I say, I can go on and on and on. And, but there was one Antiques Roadshow, it was Kansas City, a man comes in, it was about, he had a few things from a Pope, it was early in the morning, from Pope John Paul, signed, they were nice, but nothing great. Then he pulls out some photographs. It turned out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage all over the country when they came. And he had great stories about the entourage and what was going on behind the scenes. But there was one photograph he showed me. He was in his pilot's uniform. He was sitting in the pilot's seat. And the Pope, in his vestments, was on one foot with the other leg up in the air, leaning over this pilot, signing his Bible. Now, usually when you see the Pope, he's standing there, has his hand out, people kneel, kiss his ring, it's very formal. But to see him there with one leg up in the air, reaching over, signing, I'm going, this is fabulous. This will get on TV, people will love it. I go to the man, let me see the Bible. He goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I'm going, can you get it? And he goes, no, it's in a safe deposit. And I'm going, ah. Now, later in the day, I did get to tape something. Now, a couple of things I'm going to say is I do a podcast. It's called Brattlecast. You can get it through Apple or any of the podcasts, or if you can go to our website and find it. But if you like the stories, I think we've put out 100 of them already. They're 15, 20 minutes long. And I think what I'll do at this point is maybe open it up and see if there are some questions, because I can go on and on and on and on about old books, and at least I can see what the questions are. There are a couple of appraisals that were emailed in earlier. I'll go over those. Let me, though, assure you, there's a time limit on this. So anyone who doesn't get their question through or doesn't get an appraisal through, get in touch with me. One of the biggest problems of asking a question or something of a person who loves what they do, it's not getting them to answer. It's getting them to stop answering. In any case, Rachel, do we have some questions that I can do? I can't hear you. Are you muted? I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, no. Okay. There we go. So, technical.
So what was the question?
Is it better to get an autographed book without personalization?
Okay, the question of whether, in other words, if you go to an author and you say, if it's signed to Ken from John Grisham, which I have a whole story about a book like that, whether I'll get to it or not, is that better? Where that question really has come from in the last number of years is from sports collectibles. In other words, people will pay much more if it's signed Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Babe Ruth, but not to Ken, because if you're Rachel or you're Joe or whatever, it's not personalized. In sports collectibles, they like it better if it's just signed. But my feeling with books is you're getting someone to sign something who you like because they write. So I think the more they write, in other words, if they go Sudbury Historical Society lecture, they date it, they place it, they put it to you and so on, then that's, I personally like it. Or if it's like a poet like Robert Frost and they put a stanza of poetry in, that's even better. But one of the things you have to remember about most of the books that you get signed Usually they're signed by someone on a book tour. So that means they're signing lots and lots of these. Uh, 99% probably of the books you get signed, however you have them signed, they're not going to be of value. In other words, so they mean something to you, that time, that place, that remembrance. Get it the way you will like it, the way you want it. Look back on how they've remembered it, and I think you'll enjoy it much more. Now, I do have some customers who collect a particular author. Let's say a new Stephen King book comes out, and they know Stephen King and they want them all signed and inscribed. Some of them, what they'll do is they'll buy 2 copies. One copy they'll get inscribed, signed, however they want, or whatever author it might be. The second copy, they put in a acetate wraps plastic behind a glass case, maybe even a box to keep the sun out of it. And that's the copy that's their collector's copy. The other copy is the one they read and maybe get signed or whatever. I had a friend who collected Dickens books. I mean, and the condition can be, when you collect first editions, condition can be a huge part of the value. So you really want to keep it as new and perfect as you can. But I'll give him credit. He read Dickens. He used to go out to our dollar tables, find a nice copy of Dickens with a nice print, and he'd read the dollar copy and have his first edition in the glass case. So in any case. So again, do what you like, what you're going to enjoy. Don't worry about the value.
All right. So you have a best way to store or maintain hardcover books. Any advice?
Well, a lot of times the question comes up not only how to store, but should I repair and fix? And again, people like collectors who are very serious collectors like it absolutely mint pristine as it was when it first came out. And it can make a huge difference. That paper dust jacket on a book, a lot of people don't think much of it. And this is going to be in a really extreme case, but Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald's classic, a good copy of a first edition of it, which is a little complicated to figure out, but just a good copy without a jacket, will sell probably anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 or 5,000. I mean, that's still a lot of money. But the paper dust jacket on that book is particularly beautiful, very fragile, and very hard to get. If you had the first edition with the paper dust jacket, $150,000 wouldn't be. That means the book is worth a few thousand. The paper dust jacket is worth hundreds of thousands. In any case, what I usually tell people about storing things is most books, if you're comfortable, they'll be comfortable. In other words, if it's not too hot, too cold, too damp, too dry, they've lasted probably longer than we have and probably will last a whole lot longer than we will. Don't have them in direct sunlight because, you know, a lot of times you'll see two-tone books. They'll be like green on the cover, but on the spine it's brown. They didn't make them two-tone, they just faded. Also, don't put them in a shelf too tight because someone might pull it from the top and rip it, and not too loose because then they might bend and fold. So that's the basic thing. And now, if you have books that you're a major book collector, spending huge amounts of money on your books, well, then you can get atmospheric controlled, temperature controlled, all sorts of special fire suppression, but you can spend hundreds of $1,000s on the room. So most books, if they're comfortable, you're fine. Also, should you repair a book? Well, there are 2 ways to evaluate repairing. One is financial. In other words, if you have a book, it's a $5 book, it needs repair, you put a $50 or $100 repair in it. When you're done, you're still going to have a $5 book. So, but if you have a $5,000 book and you put a few $100s into repairing it, you know, maybe it does increase more than the few $100s. So financially, is the book worth the repair? And usually that's a 2-step process. Going to a dealer like me, getting an idea of the value, and then going to a bookbinder, because if you're going to do it right, it's a professional and they charge good money, you know, whether it's what it's going to cost. And many bookbinders, before they do a book, will tell them people to get an appraisal if they're worried the book isn't really worth the price. The other reason to get a book bound is sentimental. If you have the family Bible that's been handed down through the generations, uh, that might mean a lot to you and your family. Then if someone's going to say it's going to cost X hundreds of dollars to repair, you're doing it on a different base. Now, usually I say the less you do, the better. And if you have a book that's really fragile and a sort of a paper binding, maybe have the binder make a box for it and put the original in a box. You can make that as fancy or as easy as you want, but usually the less you do, the better. The less you touch it, the better. The closer to the original, the better. But that's, anyways, on that. How are the questions? Do we have a few more?
We do have a few more. Actually, on that topic, do you have any recommendations for bookbinders for anyone?
What I usually tell people is to call me on that. And then depending on what the books are, there are a few bookbinders in the area that I recommend. Another thing that I tell people is sort of a general is if you usually call a major library, a university library like Harvard or so on, and ask, call the library and ask. First of all, they usually can tell you the really good binders, they'll give out recommendations, or there's someone within their bindery who on the side earns extra money doing that type of work. So that's one way, but there are professionals who do it. And a lot of times too, one of the hard parts many times is the really, really good binders or restorers or whatever are in demand. So they might say, yes, we can do this. It's going to cost this much, and it will take 6 months before you'll get it back, or more sometimes. So that's another thing to take into account.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So here, another question. It sounds like you've embraced modern technology as a tool and have adapted the business accordingly. Is this the case, or can it be a hindrance at times?
It's not, well, I could do a whole hours and hours talking about modern technology, about how things are used. Um, my wife works here. She does a lot of the website, all the behind the scenes, the HR. I like going out and doing the lectures in Antiques Roadshow and houses and that part of the business. Uh, and technology has affected things tremendously. Now, after this question, I'm going to do the 2 appraisals people emailed in, speaking of technology, just to make sure I get to them.
Sure.
It's affected things tremendously. First of all, and in some cases, many ways that people don't expect. First of all, a lot of people now check and look things up online. What's the value, what's the price? One of my pieces of advice on doing that, first of all, is it's a tool. And like any tool, if you know how to use it and you're good at it, it's very helpful. I mean, if you have a cabinet maker and you have all their tools, the cabinet maker can make a great cabinet. Give me the same tools, the same things, and I might end up having a sore thumb because I hit it with the hammer. And in a sense, that's what some of the tools, and in many ways, I've told people that reference librarians at libraries and museums are even more important now because a lot of the information on the internet is not edited. And you can get incredible things, not just political, but on any subject. But one of the things, when you first go online and you're looking for something and you're looking up prices, the first thing to look at is how many are available. Because if you start seeing 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, the same book, in a lot of them in the same, all sorts of price ranges, what it's telling you is that 10, 20, 50, 100, none of them are selling at whatever they are. There are too many. So it has brought prices down tremendously in a lot of books, because before the internet, there were a lot of books, like you'd have a library like I have behind me, and a lot of books you'd have because you'd say, well, someday I'm going to need this because I'm going to need this little bit of information. Well, Google takes care of a lot of that. Who's bought an encyclopedia or a dictionary recently? I mean, again, If you bought a book just because you need the information and only because you need the information, most of those books you don't need. Even art books that people used to have so they could see all the pictures. Well, they're much better on the internet if you have a good screen. Uh, and it even goes beyond that. I had a friend who recently retired and he thought he'd take up tennis in the meantime. And he came in and he said, do you have any books on how to play tennis? And we looked at a few, they were okay. He says, YouTube's a lot better because you can actually see, but I mean, how to do auto repair, how to knit, how to YouTube and a lot of the ways of the instructional things. So that's eliminated. Also, before the internet, a lot of books you thought were rare, and you'd go into a bookstore and they'd be fairly high priced. They actually weren't rare, they were just hard to get. But you felt when you went in, you had to buy them because you might not find one when you need it 2 years from now. Now, first of all, you realize you go click, click, there are 50 copies online, and you realize the price is down here. But even beyond that, before you bought the book because you said, when I need it, I'm going to have it. Now you go, wait a minute, there are 50 copies available. I'll buy it when I need it. And in most cases, that means you never buy it. In any case, let me quickly do the two appraisals. Then maybe we'll do a question. Then I have one or two stories to end on.
Sure.
Someone named Carrie sent in some pictures of a book called Letters to a Young Lady on Useful and Interesting Subjects, calculated to improve the heart and to form manners, essentially an etiquette book. It was printed in May of 1798. It's the fourth American edition and printed by a man named Isaiah Thomas in Worcester. Now, first of all, those type of books, Letters to a Young Man, Letters to a Young Woman, the sort of etiquette books, they can be fascinating to go through. I mean, a lot of fun. I mean, reading what etiquette was like even 20 or 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and here you're getting over 200 years ago, it was a different world and what they expected. Also, all of these etiquette books, especially at that time and earlier, were directed at richer people, upper class. First of all, they had a library to buy books and money, and they were well educated to read. It's amazing where etiquette books first started being used was in England, even back into the 15 and 1600s. And one of the reasons they had to do etiquette books, which is the same reason they would do this, is let's say you were a lord and you had a big castle, but the king was going to come and stay at your house. Well, you had to do everything right, and you didn't know what necessarily the right things were. Maybe, how do you eat? What are the utensils? So that's essentially this in the 1700s. So these books, it's the fourth American edition. They were done in fairly good numbers. The binding on it looks good. It's probably $50 to $100 book, somewhere in that range. But what's even more interesting that might get this a little higher, Isaiah Thomas was a publisher in Boston in the 1700s. He was very much in favor of the revolution. And he wrote newspapers and things on, against the British. Well, when the British seized Boston, he had to get out of town because they would have prosecuted him or put him in jail. So he escaped well into the countryside, all the way to Worcester, which was far safe from the British. And then he started publishing and writing and had a printing company there. Now, one of the great institutions in Worcester is a museum called the American Antiquarian Society, which is one of the biggest collectors of 19th century newspapers, American history, and a load of other things. And it was started by Isaiah Thomas. So one of the things, not only was this interesting book, but there's a whole story that goes behind etiquette books. There's a whole story that goes behind the printer and why people would collect it. And it's probably in the $100, $200 range. The binding on it looked good. Now, the second one we got was from someone named Donna. And she had a series of children's books called My Book House. Now, they were done in the 20s. They were very popular. They sold huge numbers. And they're still a really nice set. I mean, they're beautifully illustrated, nice stories. People still like them, but they sold huge numbers of them. So they're fairly common. And I think right now out on our $3 or $5 tables, we have a bunch of this, not the whole set, but per volume. There are 6 to 12 volumes. So, and they don't sell fast. But one of the things that happened with my book house was you could, when in the 20s, if you wanted to spend special, they actually had a wooden house that went with the set. Now, I'm going to hold this up. I don't know whether people can actually see it, but you can see the books and you can see the house. The house is actually pretty rare. Now, one of the things when I looked at it, it was in color and the paint didn't look right to me. It looked to me like someone might have repainted to make it look good. If that's the case, it sort of spoiled the value of that, although you still have the book house with the thing. But the reality is, if you have a house with the original paint in good condition, that's worth $400 to $500. The books you can get cheaply, but the house is rare and hard to get. Tell you what, maybe I'll take one more question, then tell 2 more stories.
Okay, so we did have one more person who said that they weren't able to send their pictures, but they have a book that they're interested in learning.
Well, if you can tell me what it is, I'll try to tell you that way.
All right, Lisa, are you on? You can unmute yourself and.
Yeah, hey.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. I'm turning my camera on too. All right.
That would help.
Hi. I have an 1839 New England Gazetteer.
Gazetteer, yeah. Does it have a
Um,
map in it?
it has, well, one of the things that I kind of thought was fun about it is it has like a description of Sudbury and all the like the towns nearby, but this is my book. It's
Okay.
not in like the most awesome shape, but I kind of like to donate it to the Sudbury Historical Society if they're interested.
Well, I'll tell you what, that you can talk about later. And actually, my last story gets into that a little. So let me hold off on the
Okay.
donation part. Gazetteers, a lot of houses had gazetteers. That one, I'm pretty sure came with a map, a fold-out map, and many times it's removed because it fell out or people took the map out separately.
Yeah, this one does
In the
not have the
condition,
map.
in the binding, I see that you have, if we had it in the store, it'd be $25, $35. If it has the map in it, maybe it would be 2 or 3 times that because the map would be interesting. The cost of fixing that would be much more than the cost of getting another copy. But they're fascinating to read, the town history, the so on. And as far as giving it, wait for it. But this reminds me, the pictures in the background that you have there, the wonderful artwork
Oh.
that you have.
You would think I have young
people
children,
ask-
but they've grown up.
No, I understand, but this gets to me. I said that I was going to talk about what I think is my most valuable book. And I've had books worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, ones that we've searched for customers for years, and special things that you touch and hold. But I was listening, one of my colleagues one time got asked that question. He answered it, and I realized his was the perfect answer, and it was true for me too. And I asked him if I could steal the answer, if he didn't mind, and so I will. There's a copy of The Night Before Christmas, a nicely illustrated copy. Now, my daughters are in their 30s now, that every single Christmas since they were an infant, I have read The Night Before Christmas to them in that copy, that edition, that illustrations. And as a matter of fact, it got to the point where my older daughter, whose husband is from Texas, now they live still in the Boston area, but they would go to his house for Christmas and Christmas Eve. Before FaceTime, she had me read it on YouTube so that she could see it Christmas Eve, me reading to her. Now, if she's out of town, we do it on YouTube. She has a grandson, she has a son, so I have a grand, so Christmas Eve, I'm going to be reading that same copy. My other daughter lives in Nairobi, and I read that. So if you ask me what I think is my most valuable book, it's that exact copy that every single Christmas Eve I've read to my daughters. It means more to me than almost any other book. So that's why the paintings. I'll end on one last story. We get lots of calls about Bibles. People have 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. And sometimes we get 5 and 10 calls a week with people who have family Bibles. And in most cases, I have to say to them, if this is your family Bible, and it's been handed down through the generations, sentimentally, it's priceless, but monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, there are valuable Bibles. There's the Gutenberg Bible, which was the first printed book that, millions and millions of dollars. There's first this Bible, first that. So it's always worth checking. There are these big Victorian Bibles in mint condition with beautiful leather bindings and clasps, can sell for $100 to $300 because they make wonderful gifts for ministers, priests, divinity students. Break one clasp, break one binding, you lose all the value. Sometimes in the middle, beginning, and end of those, though there are family genealogies, births, deaths, marriages, those can be invaluable to the local historical genealogy. But a lot of times they only want to Xerox out that page, maybe the title page, and so on. In any case, I got called to a church to do an appraisal. Large old church. Church is well over 100 years old. They had a very large library, and they just wanted to see if over the years they had accumulated any valuable books. I spent a day there. They actually had some really good books. It was fun. And at the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? We have some more books. I went down the basement, looked at the books, and there were some nice ones there. But then there was a closet. It was actually a small room off in a corner. The priest opened the door, front to back, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. It was stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I said, what is this? And he said, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. Then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to donate something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, it's fabulous. But if not, you're really not doing anyone a favor. So I'll end on that note. I'll just say I have Brattlecast. This, like I say, we put one out every 2 weeks. There's 100 of them out now. If you like the stories, also anyone who I didn't get to answering questions or doing appraisals, that's one of the disadvantages of Zoom, because if I was doing it live in 15 minutes, I'd be done with everything. But don't hesitate to get in touch, to send emails, pictures, call, come in. But I'll answer any and all. It's just we're done with time. And I hope at some point, maybe somewhere down the line, we can reschedule something else and actually all be there, all together without masks. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I concur with that sentiment. I hope that in the future we can have you out here and have some more people through. And thank you so much. I was laughing so much. It was so funny and so wonderful. Thank you so much.
One of the things I try to do when I do a talk and everybody listening is I realized early on that if I went and tried to teach everybody about books, I can put you asleep in 5 minutes. But if you tell stories and just say it's interesting, then everybody can say, hey, that's fun. Let's get in touch. Let's pursue it. And that's the object. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for coming today.
All right. Bye.
Bye.